from me again, and welcome to the next session, which is looking at the evolution of the IoT roaming market. And it's a theme that MEF has been working on for quite a number of years now. And we've been working on that with our members. And going back to our survey, we also asked questions about roaming. And I think one of the findings that's coming out of there is that organizations often don't realize when their actual connection SIM cards are roaming. Of those that do recognize it, we see the most demand coming out of large enterprises, and 27% of those enterprises expect more growth over the next 12 months. And in particular, growth is going to be highest in Germany and Spain out of the markets we surveyed. And in terms of particular sectors, the automotive sector and transportation saw large growth rates, as does automotive. Unsurprisingly, it's less of an issue, or not an issue at all, in agriculture and healthcare. But rather than me tell you about roaming, I'd like to welcome a very expert panel for this session. And they're all organizations that are very active in the roaming market or provide analysis to players in the roaming market. So first of all, I'd like to welcome back Steffen Sorrell of Kaleido Intelligence. He's their Chief of Research. Hello, Steffen. Andrew. Welcome back.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you. Good to be back.
Good. And I'm also welcoming back Dawood, who's the CEO of Zariot. So welcome back. Different topic this time. And we're joined by two other organizations that are very active in IoT roaming. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Fernando of BICS.
Hello, hi, Fernando. Andrew. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you again. And last but not least, I'd like to welcome Graham from JT IoT. He's their head of sales.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. Looking forward to an interesting conversation, I think.
And we can actually see you, Graham, because we were a bit worried that we wouldn't be able to see you.
It was a little bit frantic backstage, wasn't it?
It was. So I'm going to kick off a general question. Why is IoT roaming something we should even be bothering about? Is it important? Is it not? Steffen, do you want to kick off with that one?
It's important because essentially IoT is a global business. You mentioned automotive just now, just to take that as an example. I mean, the supply chains and where the vehicles end up are truly global. So what you often have is the company is involved in the manufacture of products and wants connectivity for that product, often doesn't really know where the product is going to end up. So you have all these products being produced. Companies, they want to connect their assets, they want to monitor or provide services with those assets, and they need a solution to enable that connectivity wherever the device or the asset ends up. And really, roaming is an integral part of that, because, well, first of all, obviously, it enables data transfer across borders, but the roaming ecosystem is relatively well established in terms of the partnerships that have been set up, the bilateral agreements. There are roaming alliances, roaming hubs that deliver connectivity to perhaps upwards of 700 mobile network operators, even more across the world. So if I'm a company and I'm looking to deploy an IoT solution, really the simple, or one of the simplest go-to-market strategies is to use an IoT roaming solution to enable that asset to be connected.
So I'll bring Fernando in there and say, is roaming important, Fernando?
Yes, I mean, besides the fact that it's one of our, let's say, of our core business, we see it as a very important part because, I mean, repeating somehow what Steffen said, if you want an instant worldwide coverage, and let's say some interesting features like having, for example, multi-networks per country, and have, let's say, a kind of different choice when you want your devices to connect internationally, it's a key part. And again, this allows, let's say, the companies who want to deploy the IoT solutions, in the ideal case, to have just a single point of contact for all their connectivity needs. This is something that technically and commercially makes a lot of sense, and that of course, I mean, we see there is a positive reaction in the market to this. So indeed, in our case, it's really an important part of the IoT value chain.
Yeah, Graham, anything you'd like to add to that comment?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it sort of picks up on what Fernando was saying. It's about ubiquity. It's about that ubiquity of connectivity, so that you know your device, wherever it's manufactured, you can test it at the end of the line. You know that where it's going to work, where it gets deployed, it's going to work. But more importantly, you're giving that device choice when it arrives in a destination. So it's not going to be just tied to a single network in a country. It's going to have multiple network access opportunities. And without that, your sort of Internet of Things device just becomes a thing, right? It's not connected, so therefore it's useless.
Yeah. And finally, Dawood, any comments you'd like to add on that? Can't hear you at the moment.
You're in mute.
Sorry. I'm going to abstract a little bit from that and, kind of establish the fact that the roaming connectivity part is the very last piece within the whole value chain, and is to some extent, the commodity component, within that. So when you look at IoT connectivity, a lot of the people that are deploying it are really looking for control as well as the connectivity. So what do they deem the most important thing, assuming that, I'm automatically going to get connectivity? They want to be able to control it, manage it, select what kind of quality of service they want, on it. So stepping back, that very, very end piece of the chain is just simply IoT roaming. So whether it's, a SIM card, which is, on its own native national network, or outside of it in a roaming environment, it is ultimately how you deliver that control to that device. That is the important piece, rather than the very, very last leg, which is the connectivity.
Right. Yeah, you've kind of led me in very nicely to the next question I had, which is, what enterprises need beyond connectivity? And I know in research we've done, we've looked at the value chain and seen what percentage connectivity accounts for in the whole $1 value. And it can be hovering around the 10 cents mark. I'm sure there's different people who've got different views, and there's segments and geographies to take into account. But in terms of moving beyond connectivity for customers using IoT roaming services, what do you see their particular needs? So I'll put that one to Graham first.
Yeah, I think there's a whole broad range of things that people need or companies need, besides just the connectivity. They obviously need to be able to control the device, need to activate, deactivate, need to be able to do it automatically. They need to be able to do it in such a way that they can build it into their own solution to give their customers one pane of glass. But equally, we're seeing a much higher demand now for security, end-to-end security, network integration as well. We're seeing more and more sophisticated customers who don't just want a simple pipe. They want to be able to control what's going over that pipe, sometimes when it goes over that pipe, and the type of data that goes over that pipe as well. So yeah, it's not just about a simple dumb piece of plastic in a device pumping data out willy-nilly anymore.
Fernando, would you like to come in there?
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of the first things that Graham mentioned. people are demanding us more and more that the connectivity is integrated in their industrial processes, especially when we are dealing with companies building up devices and machines. All they want the connectivity to be present as soon as possible in their production chain. So they want to be able to include the connectivity while they are testing, designing, and all this is, let's say, automatically linked to their business processes, so that the operators building up the machines, they just need to push the buttons, test the radio, the connectivity is already present, and this is somehow seamless part of the production process. So I mean, that's also something that they are asking us in terms of IT developments. I mean, this because after all, as Graham said, it's not just the data that is transferring, but somehow to be able to integrate deeper into their production and business processes.
Thank you, Fernando. I'm going to take a slight step back, and we've talked about this demand for IoT in enterprises, and that roaming is an important market. I'd like to get a feel for the sort of size and scale of it. So I'm going to turn to Kaleido Intelligence, who have done a lot of research on IoT roaming, and ask Steffen, do you have a feel for how the market is developing, how it's growing, how big it is?
Yeah, I mean, when we look towards around 2025, 2026, I mean, approximately by that time, we're looking at a total cellular IoT market of around 4.8 billion connections, but those that are roaming, we're expecting about 1 billion of those to be roaming. So it's quite a sizable market. In terms of geographies, I think Europe and Central Asia are the largest proportion of roaming devices because of the relatively favorable regulatory landscape, as well as, of course, the whole aspect of the European Union and so on. So it's all pretty favorable towards roaming. But then, of course, we also see fairly high opportunity for regions such as North America, East Asia, and Pacific as well. When we look at these specific verticals, I think you touched on those at the beginning when you introduced your survey. So we do see logistics, automotive as being a particularly important part of the overall IoT roaming space. But, and this has really been boosted by COVID-19, and we've seen this in the module market last year, and we expect this to be reflected in the module market moving forward. We're going to see a lot more deployments in terms of things like asset tracking and monitoring, where businesses are accelerating sort of their digitization efforts and really streamlining their processes through connectivity.
Yeah, I'll bring Dawood in on this question. I know you have some views on what's happening in emerging markets.
Well, I suppose, one of the most important things to bear in mind is, the nature of those regional plays. A lot of the emerging markets are a little bit trepidatious about, allowing roaming devices into their countries. Not so much from a commercial point of view, but from a security and a control point of view. And they do want audit and national registers of, things that are coming in and what they might be doing. And there are some countries that have implemented some of this stuff already. But I suppose more interestingly is what people are looking for, coming down the line, within the next, year, 18 months, 2 years. They're kind of imagining that, well, if we have a lot of these IoT devices coming into the country and they're roaming, what are they doing, and how can we either control them because we're worried about them from a security point of view, or how can we monetize on them, which is, aside from whatever the operators are getting from their, data roaming revenue, how can we apply a fixed fee to basically license the IMEI, coming into the country in the same ways like there would be, let's say, a tax. So it makes this whole environment very, very complex, and very, very difficult to navigate, because, while you may, deploy something and assume it works now, like, who knows what your, emerging market may have coming down the line, which you have absolutely no idea how they're going to deploy it. And, the legal basis by which a lot of them are doing it, would be very, very different, to how we would look at a legal framework, say in Europe or the US, that would, guarantee a lot of things to just simply work. A lot of these markets can simply, dictate, how and why they want to operate, with immediate effect, and simply, say, if you don't like it, then, we'll just disable your device. And whatever consequences occur, then, there's no real recourse. So it is interesting to, kind of watch this space, and monitor that kind of emerging, market dynamic.
Yeah, I'll stay that theme. There are sort of quite a number of regimes and regulatory authorities where there are issues around allowing roaming IoT. In a similar sort of vein, we have permanent roaming. So what sort of issues is permanent roaming throwing up? So I'll go to Graham first on this one.
Do you mean access to permanent roaming?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, it does obviously create an issue, because people at places like Brazil, where you have 90 days or something of roaming allowed. I think we see it splitting, broadly speaking, into two different types of restrictions. We see the commercial restrictions, where you get in somewhere like Canada, where the network operators tend to not want permanent roaming on their networks, because they're trying to protect their market, typically from American networks. Or then you get the regulatory permanent roaming bans in places like Turkey and Brazil, where you're getting regulators saying, no, you're not allowed permanent roaming, and they tend to do it more, and India as well, more for the security side of it than commercial side of it. So there's two different issues, or two different causes, but there's one single issue, and the only solution we've been able to find to it is to deploy eSIM with a local profile.
Right.
That it ticks all the boxes. It ticks the regulatory box because it's a local class as a local SIM, and you're buying directly from the commercial side. You're buying directly from a local operator, so they see it as more value to them than just pure roaming.
Right, thank you. Anybody else want to come in there, or I'm happy to move on to the sort of next area of focus.
Well,
So
I would maybe to add just another option to this can also be to establish maybe direct roaming agreements. This is something that we are trying to get engaged into. So just to have another option besides the eSIM with the local profile that Graham just mentioned, having direct agreements, let's say it's a long shot because it takes time, but it's also a valid option so that everyone is happy from a security, a revenue perspective.
thank you, Fernando.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch our attention slightly to the supply side of things, and we have three organizations with us today who are all very active in the IoT roaming environment. And I'm going to ask a multifaceted question. And I think I'm going to put it to Steffen first to get a kind of umbrella view of how he sees going on. So who are these roaming suppliers? How are they capitalizing on opportunities, and what do they need to do to make themselves successful in this market?
Okay, so I think we can look at it from two perspectives. I mean, first of all, you obviously have the MNOs. I mean, you've got tier one MNOs such as AT&T, Deutsche Telekom, Vodafone, all big in the IoT space and active in IoT roaming. And they obviously rely on their own footprints and roaming alliances to offer a pretty broad global coverage. On the other hand, you have a number of Other players, BICS, for example, for roaming hubs, you've got other sort of IoT MVNOs who may participate in similar models, who have very broad agreements with operators all around the world to enable global connectivity. Really, I think that really the way to capitalize on this market is something that just keeps coming up when you look at enterprises and through enterprise surveys, is that the issue of coverage still comes up. So when you look at a tier 1 MNO and they say that, okay, they've got this great coverage, but that roaming footprint is by nature is limited. So once you go outside of that footprint, you may be looking at spiraling costs, or you may be looking at suboptimal performance in terms of the connectivity and ultimately the applications. It's not ideal. What we need to do is to continue on building out these partnerships to optimize that coverage. We need, as a couple of the panelists mentioned earlier, we really need to enable controls for the enterprise to optimize how they access that connectivity, control that connectivity, and then I suppose to finally address your final part of the point in terms of monetization. And I'm sure the rest of the panel has some good comments on this, but especially when we look at the low power side of the market, particularly on the wholesale side, it's not a very sustainable business model. When you look at how roaming agreements have traditionally been set up, which are based on megabytes and gigabytes, you got low power connections which are using less than 10 megabytes a month. So on the wholesale side, the revenues are low. So we need to look at new ways of monetizing those connections in a balanced way that is favorable for both wholesale as well as retail suppliers.
Thanks, Steffen. I'll move over to Fernando on this and ask, how are you capitalizing on opportunities, and what particular challenges do you see in IoT roaming as a supplier?
I mean, that's an easy transition from what Steffen said, because actually it's one of the questions. Our suppliers are mostly, in terms of roaming, the tier 1 mobile operators, and we are setting up with them new business models to tackle that, because we are talking about very, let's say, tiny amounts of data in certain technologies that will be roaming in several countries. So today, when we discuss the roaming agreements, we are moving to a model in which most of the times, both at wholesale and retail level, we are going to have to pay some fees, monthly fees per unit, per bunch of IMSIs or whatever, so that the business case is more sustainable for the mobile operator. So we are seeing, let's say, a shift into this direction from the standard megabyte exchange at the end of the month. So this is something that we are seeing, and which is good for the mobile operators, because this allows them somehow to monetize the investment. And at the same time, let's say, if it's kind of cascaded to the retail side of the business, at the end, it ends up making sense for everyone. Your devices are very tiny. They are going to send a small amount of data. Well, you have to pay few cents or whatever per month, and that's it. So that's something that we are clearly seeing in the market. And to be clear, we are signing roaming agreements with mobile operators in those terms. So it's not just a trend; it's already a reality.
No, it does sound as though new business and commercial models will change over time, and new ones will emerge. Now we've had two very robust answers, but I will bring Dawood in next to see if he has anything to add to this point of discussion.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of very complicated, the way in which people talk about monetization. That's kind of one aspect. There's a huge cost to allowing these devices on should they start to misbehave. So what we're assuming is that everything lands on your network and roams on your network and works as per the specification without much issue. However, we've seen multiple issues arise around devices not working properly, and effectively, causing congestion, causing downtime, and costing the network money. So while they might have had some kind of commercial benefit to it, it's kind of negligible, if you take into consideration the amount of disruption that it could cause. Now, it's a bit of a risk because no one's really providing any kind of certification. It's just like, we'll land X million devices on your network, we'll consume, 100 meg per month for X period of time, but we're not supplying any kind of guarantee that, well, actually, these devices are really good quality devices. They're not going to consume much network resources. They're not going to reboot automatically every night at midnight because there's a flaw in them. I think that there's a certain level of, I suppose, penalty that I could see being applied, maybe through the back door as some kind of revenue generator in the medium to long term based on that, simply to ensure that, yep, fine, come, we'll give you something for relatively low cost. But if you start, dumping really crappy devices on our network that don't really work properly, and start causing us issues, we're going to make you pay.
Yeah. And finally, thank you, Dawood. And finally, Graham, if you have anything to add on that point.
No, I completely concur with what Dawood's been saying. As providers of connectivity, we need to ensure that our suppliers are happy with the devices that our customers are putting on their network. Otherwise, it rapidly becomes an unsustainable piece of business, and nobody's interested in not having a sustainable business. So it's beholden on everybody, I think, in the value chain to ensure that the devices are GSMA compliant, that the roaming agreements are fit for purpose. They're not everybody. We're happy paying a monthly recurring charge because it seems equitable. But if you make that too high, then it's not equitable. So if you want success, everybody's got to do their bit to make sure that the entire value chain, that dollar, is everybody gets their fair share of it, and it is successful for everybody.
Thank you, Graham. We have about 2 minutes left, and I have a lot of questions to get through that I'm not going to be able to get through in the time available. So my final question is one around technologies. We see that there are lots and lots of technologies out there, legacy technologies, new technologies. Is it just all too confusing for an organization, for a potential customer? I'll let you go first on that one, Graham.
Yeah, I don't think it's too confusing. I'll try and be brief. I don't think it's too confusing. I do think when customers are selecting the technology they want to use, they need to bear in mind that the devices are out there for probably a lot longer than the technology that they're choosing is. So if you're going for 3G now, think about, well, you need Cat M1 in the future. If you're going for Cat M1 now, do you need to think about the fact that Cat M1 isn't ubiquitous? So therefore you need a fallback. Is that fallback 4G? So you just need to take a sensible approach and don't believe the hype around 5G. That is definitely my advice.
Okay, Dawood, would you like to come in there?
I think the lowest common denominator, should always be kind of assumed. So, what technology do we think is going to be cheap enough to roll out, but last kind of for the longest period of time? I'm kind of hoping to see some more clarity around this, over the next year or two. Hopefully it's 4G, and that's, specifically around the fact that a lot of networks are thinking of shutting down even their 3G services. So it's wait and see.
Thank you, Dawood. And very, very rapidly, Fernando, and then I'll finish with Steffen.
I think just taking, I rephrasing your question, I think it's too confusing right now. There are many components that customers need to consider. The evolution, the technical evolution that Graham mentioned, the pricing, the business model, and today they need some kind of guidance. The thing is that sometimes it's not the connectivity provider the best place to do that, because you have the solution, the components, the OEMs. But I would say that yes, it's a little bit confusing. They have too much of a choice, and it sometimes it delays the plans, to be honest.
Thank you. And very, very quickly, Steffen, to round the session up.
Yeah, I mean, I just mirror Fernando's points there. I mean, just one last couple of points really is that, especially in terms of narrowband IoT, we really need to see some expansion in terms of the roaming agreements that are available. And also we need to see more network operators start enabling things like EDRX and PSM, so the power saving modes that are offered for these types of devices, so that enterprises can maximize the devices that are out there in the field and roaming in terms of their overall battery life.
Thank you, Steffen. So I'd like to say a big thank you to you all for taking part in this discussion. Do stay with us because we have quite a few interesting sessions coming up this afternoon. So I'll say thank you and goodbye to Steffen, to Graham, to Fernando, and to Dawood.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.